Okay, so guys, the idea of this session is really to give you a little bit of um, uh, peep into the Lego Serious Play methodology. Typically, when we run the session, it's always done as a hands-on session because that's the essence of the methodology per se. But since we are in virtual, I think obviously that part of it will not be there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a walkthrough of the whole. How is that methodology? How did it evolve? How is it used? What's the typical process flow for that? And what are the use cases really of Lego Serious Play in different places? Like, yeah. In case you have any question, do feel free to raise your hands, and I think we can take it. Okay. All right. So, formal welcome to the session. Before we start, a very quick introduction about us. I think we are an organization which is a little more than a decade old. We have offices in these 4 locations. Typically, we run 700 odd workshops a year, spread across different locations. And after the pandemic, it's also now virtual. So we run virtual workshops for customers in the US, Europe, Africa, Middle East, even the Southeast of Asia, different places. In terms of the focus, I think we focus on 9 specific areas all around people capability development. And we have clients spread across India and Mauritius because we have an office in Mauritius. So these are the 2 areas where we have most of our work happening. Like 2 words that customers use to describe us a lot is passionate and professional. So much so that if you go to our website, you will see that we have a very unconventional promise that we put, which is called happy or free. And we've had this from day one, which basically says that if we run a workshop and if there's a customer who comes back and says it didn't meet their standards for whatever reason, we say that we give it free to them because we didn't earn that workshop in a certain way. Like so. That's helped us stay passionate as an organization, even as we've grown bigger as an organization. As a mission, what we are looking at as an organization is really this, that not to do workshops which are just like a tick mark, but really to say, how do we do workshops that impact people, that create an impact? So when we're looking at an intervention, we don't look at it only from a workshop point of view. We look at it very holistically from what are we doing pre-engagement, what are we doing post, how is this learning going to be taken back into the workplace? So we look at the whole spectrum of a learning intervention, really. Yeah, that's about us. What are we going to do today? This is the broad agenda of what we're kind of trying to cover today in the session. The only thing which I will not be able to get you to do is this hands-on session, but I'll just talk you through this whole thing. Yeah. In terms of case studies, I'm going to take you through one case study. If we find time, we will try and do one more case study. Like, yeah. Okay, and the last part is where I kind of just stop and take any kind of questions you have about how do you execute it or anything at all which you have after you go through this whole thing. Like, yeah. While the session is happening, if you have any questions, feel free to kind of ask those questions. I think it will help everybody in the group. All right. So a very quick history of Lego Serious Play and how did it really emerge? So, in the 1994-95 was a time when Lego as a company was going through almost an existential crisis. The profitability was very low and a lot of people, the new generations were actually moving out of Lego in some ways. People were not engaging with the Lego bricks in some way. Like most companies, what Lego did is Lego got in all the top 4 consultants in the world, the McKinseys, the BCGs, the Bains, everybody came in, but nothing of that really seemed to be helping. Like, so which is when the idea really emerged by the founder in terms of saying that, hey, if there is a problem that we are having as an organization, we need to find a way to solve it by ourselves. So can we use Lego bricks in some way to make a strategy in some ways? And that is when they also reached out to some professors who were at IMD Lausanne. And together with them, I think over a period of 4-5 years from 95 to 2000, they really worked to create this methodology, which was called Lego Serious Play. It's called Serious Play because while it's a very playful methodology, it is used to solve problems which are very serious for organizations in some ways. Like 2001, 2002 is when the Lego company created bricks, Lego bricks, which were very customized for adaptation to the Lego Serious Play methodology in some ways. And over the next 7-8 years, I think the whole methodology saw a lot of refinement in terms of what it started out with to what it finally turned out and how the shape it has actually seen itself in today. In this process, there was a lot of user assessment testing done. There were a lot of companies who willingly kind of adapted this because they just saw that the engagement levels using LSP was far higher than any other strategy definition methods, really. So 2010 onwards is the Lego Serious Play methodology is what you're currently seeing today. From our perspective, in Focus U, I think we got certified in the Lego Serious Play methodology in May of 2011. So for the last 10 odd years, I think we've been using this methodology with different customers for defining different kind of problems and helping solve different kind of problems, really. Yeah. So that's a very quick snapshot of how this method has really evolved to what it is today. Yeah. All right. So quickly, what is Lego Serious Play? So at the heart of it, if we have to define Lego Serious Play, it's basically a method of thinking, communication, problem solving for leadership teams. Okay. Now, because the definition is so broad, the methodology can be used to solve different kind of problem for different kind of teams. So we've seen marketing teams adopt this to solve problems which are around, say, branding. How do we brand a certain product, or how do we decide on our go-to-market in for a certain offering which we have. We've seen product teams using it for problem solving in terms of saying, a certain product, what is the kind of features it needs to have, those kind of things. We've seen leadership teams sometimes using it for defining things like saying, as a leadership team, what should leadership mean for each one of us? And, if we need to have one face to the larger organization, what should leadership in our organization mean to solve those kind of. So one of the common threads which you would see in all these kind of problems which people are trying to solve is that it doesn't have one right answer. So when you ask a question of saying, what does leadership mean to you? If there are 10 people sitting around the table, each of them would have a different perspective around what leadership really means. So Lego is typically, LSP as it's called, is typically used to solve problems which don't have one right answer. Yeah. Now, typically when we run a workshop, at this stage is when around a table, we get people to be sitting around a table and we give them small packets of Lego pieces, which is called as an Explorer kit. And what we ask them to do is something like this. We just give them a kit which has, say, 15-20 Lego pieces, and we say, find a plate, which is a black plate, which is there, and we want you to build a tower. Okay, make it entirely as you want, and you roughly have around 4 minutes to build this whole tower. Now, what happens is 4 minutes passes away in a complete, like before people know, it's almost like 3.5 minutes almost done. And just when it's around 3.5 minutes, we say, hey, guys, by the way, one of the things we need to remind you is this: after you finish building the tower, we are going to be having like a Bajaj test. So Bajaj test is, if those of you would remember the old scooters, when it didn't start, you had to kind of incline it 45 degrees and then make it straight again. So similarly, we say that after you build your tower, we're going to try and incline it 45 degrees and then bring it back straight again. Okay, now the minute we say that, we hear that ooh and all happening, but 30 seconds just passes off in a jiffy actually. Now, once they finish this, we ask people to kind of show. There are 8 people around the table. We ask them to show, can you just show your tower to each person? So people show their towers. And the interesting thing is that none of the towers, there are no 2 towers that look similar. Okay, given a problem saying build a tower, if there are 8 to 10 people around a table, 10 towers will look as 10 different unique pieces. There's nothing which is going to be common between any of these things. So that's a point where we kind of bring in this insight of LSP, which really says that, given a problem, if there are 10 people around a table, chances are there are going to be 8 different perspectives which are going to come. Okay, and what LSP really does is it democratizes the voice around the table. So when I say democratizes, what it does is, in most conversations around a table, even if it's a leadership team, 80% of the 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 voice space is really taken by 20% of the people most of the time. But what Lego does is, because people build and then we get them to talk about their Lego piece, each person gets to bring his point of view onto the conversation in some ways. Yeah. Now, at this stage of the workshop, what we tell people is this: we say, great job so far, so let's raise the bar one level for you guys. Okay. And then we say, we're going to introduce you to the next challenge. And the next challenge is this, that we give them a book, which is called as Imaginopedia. And the Imaginopedia basically has 4 or 5 different, slightly more complex Lego models to be built. But it is shown step by step in terms of saying, how do you build this model? Yeah. So the idea is really to give people a comfort about Lego, to get them really, comfortable about saying, hey, this is not so complex as we think it is. Because sometimes, since we do this with senior teams, and senior teams are a little bit more stuck up in terms of using play as a methodology when they're trying to solve a problem, really. So you want to kind of get that bar down for them. And so the time moves very, very quickly here also. But the interesting thing that we do is, just as they finish building this thing, just as they are finishing building this thing, we say, hey, we're going to give you 1 more minute. Okay. And I want you to think about whatever is the model that you built. Why does this represent the model of, let's say, an inspirational boss for you? Okay, this is just an example. It can be an inspirational boss. It can be an inspirational day. It can be just about anything. Okay, but what you're really doing as a facilitator there is you're getting people, they have already built something, but in a minute, you're asking them to quickly give meaning to the stuff that they have already built. Okay, and the interesting thing is this, that it doesn't take people long at all. Okay, people very quickly kind of jump onto metaphors like. So, for example, these are from our actual workshops, where we have actually taken some of these things. So somebody said, carrying a heavy load, carrying a heavy workload. Okay, somebody said agile leadership. Okay, somebody said staying under the radar, being on target. The interesting thing that we have noticed over the last decade of working with LSP in India is, especially in India, I think people are very, very comfortable using metaphors, because I think as Indians, our language is suffused with metaphors, right? We talk in talking, we say, right? We say, "Arey, wo to hit wicket ho gaya, wo to clean bowled ho gaya, wo to clean sixer ho gaya." Like a lot of metaphors that we use in our language very, very naturally as such. But these are not metaphors just for the sake of metaphors. These are metaphors in the context of, it's a serious play, right? It's not just play. So when you ask a question and people are building something, they are building models with meaning. So if you look at a model, these are 2 examples again from a workshop which somebody had built. Let's say somebody built a model like this and says, I cannot understand why a new business model does not work. And if you look at the wheels there, the wheels are all square wheels. Okay. What he really wanted to indicate was saying that, look, I think we need to go back to the fundamentals of our business and say, are the fundamentals in the right place or not? Okay. Similarly, somebody put a cow like this and said, we have to change our traditional ways of thinking, because what he was trying to also say was saying, there are holy cows in the business. Like some things which we say that, ye to hum touch nahi kar sakte. So we have to re-look at that in some way. Okay, we have to change our traditional way. So this is the way in which people very naturally kind of use metaphors and very easily give meaning to what they're doing in some ways. Yeah. So what is the difference? The difference is this, that, if you were to do a meeting of a senior group and a traditional meeting, I think many of you, if you kind of had this experience, you would know that this is how a traditional meeting would go, where people would talk, and if you see one person is talking and most people are listening and stuff like that. But in a Lego serious play meeting, typically this is how it really goes, that you see a lot of people standing up, working on those pieces, everybody's involved, everybody's talking. So the difference really is this, that while meeting with Lego serious play is a lean forward meeting, normal other meetings tend to become lean backward meeting. So 100% participation versus 20% participation. And so what's the benefit really? The benefit is broadly this, that you see much more of participation, much more insights coming in, more ideas, more passion, ownership, and commitment really coming in. And it's interesting. I talked about the Bajaj test, which we do initially, right? And I forgot to mention one thing. After people talk about, show their models, one of the questions we always ask them is, hey, when there was 30 seconds to go, I said that we're going to be testing your model. How did you feel about that? And there are interesting viewpoints which come across the table. Some people said, that was okay. Some people say, you know what, you should have told that before. It's something that people have just built in the last 3 minutes. But the minute people build something by themselves, they start getting emotionally attached to it in some ways. In fact, even when people build their models, if you ask them to break it, you will see their faces just, turning small in a certain way, right? And say that, hey, come on. So, what you're really doing is you are bringing in conversations that naturally have emotions in it. And people who are in L&D would know that one of the big components of learning is when emotion gets involved, learning becomes more deep-rooted in some ways, really. Okay. All right. So as a process, if you look at how the whole Lego Serious Play process works, this is the whole flow of how the LSP process works, guys. That the facilitator would typically ask the question, okay, for which people would be asked individually to build a metaphorical story. Okay. Once people build a metaphorical story, they give meaning to it as they build it. Okay. And once they finish building it, each of them shares their story with the rest of the group. Okay. And once they do that, once everybody in the group has finished speaking, we then look at saying, are there any questions? Are there any reflections? Are there any patterns which are emerging? Okay, are there similar kind of things which are coming up from different people within the team? Depending, of course, on what is it that we are trying to solve for, as the main questions. Now, the first thing in terms of saying the facilitator asks a question, the question is, of course, pre-decided before the workshops in conjunction with the client in terms of saying, what is it that we're trying to achieve with this session? What is it that we want as an end goal of the session? Really? Yeah. So very broadly, Lego Serious Play, the reason it worked for Lego, and Lego, as some of you might be knowing, is today considered one of the most profitable companies in the world. And what worked for Lego with Lego Serious Play is this. The belief that if there are problems that a team or a group or an organization has, the ideas to solve it, all those problems, lies with all the team members within that team itself and not some external consultants. But in most cases, those ideas are not tapped. So LSP is really about saying, how do you tap the ideas that are already there in the heads of your people, and how do you kind of help bring it and make it a reality in some way? For those of you who are wondering if there is any science behind it, these are a few of the signs on which this whole thing is grounded. I'll not talk about all of it in detail, but one of the most powerful things why LSP works is what's called as the hand-bone, brain-bone connection. If you look at your hands, one of the things that neurosurgeons have now kind of told us is this, that the largest part of our brain, the neurons, the largest portion of neurons in our brain is actually connected to our limbs, to our fingers. So when we're actually working with Lego bricks, when you're actually working with them in some way, you are tapping onto a part of your intelligence which you normally don't tap onto. A lot of schools, for example, have also adopted this, where children are given toys to play with, because the belief is this, that when you play in the external world, you're also building in your internal world. Okay, and few more other sciences like the flow theory, which kind of supports with the play science, imagination, like they say that imagination is more powerful than knowledge. So given a situation, if you can tap onto the imagination of your people, chances are you'll come out with much more richer kind of solutions to this. Okay, all right. Having said all that, so let's now get on to a practical thing. Okay, so I'm going to show you a sample flow of a session. In fact, these are the actual slides, output slides from a session that we ran for a leadership group in Goa hardly 2 weeks back. Okay, and this is a group that came to us. It's a leadership team that came to us where they were trying to arrive at two things. One, what is the shared aspiration for this team? What is the vision that we as a leadership team should be having together? And other a few guiding principles that we need to kind of have before we kind of go ahead into the real world in some ways. So the way we structured the whole workshop is like this, that the workshop was done around a day's time, a day and a half time. And the way it was structured was like this, that the initial 1 hour of any LSP session is taken in an introduction to LSP, really. In introduction to LSP, what we really do is we get people familiar with the LSP methodology. Okay, why is this important? This is important because, especially in senior teams, when they come into the room and they see a lot of Lego bricks lying around with their colorful bricks, there are a lot of questions that people have in their head, questions they don't voice out immediately, but hey, is this going to be some silly team building stuff? Is this relevant? Hey, I've never played with Lego before, so am I going to be at a disadvantage? So a little bit of apprehension, which is there in some ways. So what we try and do in the first 1 hour is we go through the sequence of questions for them, where we gradually raise the challenge levels for them, where we make them familiar with the whole process of LSP in terms of saying that this is the whole process. And the second is, by the end of it, we get people to know that it is not about their skill of building the models. It's not how good your model looks that matters. It is more about what is the meaning that you have given to the model that is more important. Okay, so that is the first 1 hour which we do, and then we go to the next parts, which I'll talk through as we kind of come ahead. So this is the process. The first 1 hour kind of went in this, and then the next two questions really pertain to the business reality of the leadership team. Okay. So the next question, which was about saying, where do you stand today as an organization, as a leadership team? Where do we stand today? So this is a question that we pose to the team as a facilitator, and saying, as a team, where do you stand today? What are our strengths and assets? What are our challenges? And what are our opportunity areas? Construct a model and share the story. Okay. So there were around 8 of them around the room, and each of them, they were introduced to much more richer pieces of Lego, which lended themselves to more metaphorical meanings. And people were given around roughly 15 to 20 minutes to actually think through this and start building it. One of the things we tell people as they build is, we tell them, don't start having a conversation with yourself, or don't make notes and then try and show that in LSP. Just start building, because as you start building with LSP, you're tapping onto a different intelligence, and then you will see that the ideas emerge. Okay, naturally they start emerging. So how did it look like? I'm going to give you a quick snapshot. Okay, so for example, this is one of the leadership team members who built a model like this, and this is what she said, that LT that's agile, fundamentals that are strong, goals are sharply defined. And you can read some of the stuff. We need to do this while growing our second line leaders. Similarly, somebody else in the team do this. And as you're looking through this and as you're reading through this, I also want you to look at how different each of these models are, right? Each of them is very, very different, but you would also perhaps see that there are some common threads that are there through this whole process, that each of them, there are some things which kind of start repeating in some ways. LT members, top of the game. So you see those people who are all standing at the top over there. Strong connections, but connections don't extend evenly. You see that? They are inward focused. So you see how people use metaphors. All those small figurines of people who are standing, you see that because they are focused inwards. That's a very nice way to really put it, saying that, hey, you know what? Our leadership team is focused inwards. We need to be focused outwards. We need to look outside to what's happening in the world. What are the best practices we can get in? What's our competition doing? That kind of a thing. Some of them were able to, detail this in much richer aspects. So if you see Ankita, for example, she was able to do it in a much richer way, where they're talking about 3 pillars and how one of the pillars is kind of not in place, and which is something which they need to, bring correctly. Yeah. get this. Okay. So as you see the models, you'll see each of those models lend themselves. So if you see those blue bricks which are there, now people naturally kind of take it and say it represents a transparent organization, right? Or transparency within a group. Yeah. Similarly, you see those green bricks up in front. Okay, that represents money. So there are money bricks which are there in LSP in some ways. There are flags which are there. Okay. Similarly, there are gears which are there. And this was a very interesting thing which one of the guys, the finance guy, talked about, where he said how the gears, all the gears are not aligned, which means that while some gears are aligned and when they turn, the whole organization moves, there are some gears which are disconnected, which need to be put in place in some ways. So very naturally, these conversations kind of tend to flow. And people are very surprised that, using metaphors, how quickly we can get to the root of the problem using metaphors in some way. Like, yeah, this is one other. So, once people did this, we do a small process where we kind of look at saying, hey, what really emerged from this? And if you look at what emerged from this, these are the few things that emerged for this particular team, really, right? The strengths which everybody spoke about, many of them spoke about, was this, that it's a strong, diverse, connected LT, strong fundamentals, credibility of good. But watch-outs, which everybody also talked about, is these are all the different watch-outs that we as an organization, we as a leadership team have. Okay. Now, once they are clear in terms of saying that where we stand today, then we move to the next part, which is really about saying, what is our aspiration as a leadership team? Only thing is, we kind of try and we frame the question in a different way. So if you see the way the question is framed, we framed it in a futuristic way. The year is 2024. It's a global annual awards night, and all of you are in the room. The last 2 years, this India leadership team has done phenomenally well and is being recognized as an amazing team that has delivered quality, sustainable growth. What has this team done to have created such a legacy? Construct a model and share the story. And now you will see that the stories get a little more richer in some ways. Like, okay, we allow people to use the model that built earlier to kind of change it in any ways, to build on it, to remove a few bricks if they need it, or if they want to, they can completely start from scratch also. Like, yeah. And you see, while it is play, all the things that have come are serious issues that have come up, like mental monkeys, competition, okay, processes that need to be taken care of, building the next generation of leaders, hitting 1,000 crore revenue. Okay, so these are serious things. While it's playful, it's a serious thing still, right? Okay. So different team members built different things. And then what we did was we followed a process where if you see the model which is there right in between, it's a model which has been then built using all the different ideas which came in all the different models. So the way we do this, and it's a process which is called a shared model building, where after everybody's talked about all the stories, we say, hey, so while we did this story, session, different people had different aspirations which were there, and there were some commonalities which were there. Now, what we want you to do is we want you to start with one of the models that you've already built, which kind of captures many of those stories, and add on to it the things that are not captured, okay, in that particular model, but which has been said in your model. So it is like a summation of all the ideas that everybody in the group really has. So what really came out was something like this. Okay, and this basically captured all the ideas, all the thoughts that this particular leadership team had as a shared aspiration for this leadership team. Like, yeah, one of the things which we did or we can do, which this is in terms of building on it, is in terms of saying, if what is built in between is the shared aspiration for the team, what are all the different things that can impinge on that strategy? Okay. There are external factors, there are internal factors. What are all the things that can impinge on this strategy? And people connected with different kind of strings. Some of those strings are hard connectors, some are loose connectors. So what it really means is, if this factor changes, then how does it affect your shared aspiration in some way? Like, yeah. And hence, you're kind of really, what you're doing through this is you are doing what's called as real-time strategy. You're playing real-time strategy because you're seeing your entire strategy laid out on the table in a 3D format. And then you can actually pull each of those strings and say, what happens to the whole ecosystem? When we did something like this with a group which was for one of the soft drink beverage company, I remember they had built something and they said, hey, let's say one of it is one of our competitors, and the competitor drops pricing. What happens? And when they pull it, actually, they see that the whole model shakes in a certain way. So it is to really say that this is a hard connector, which means that in case competitor drops price, we need to react immediately or our business will get affected. Whereas there are some other things like government policies. Government has changed policy. What's going to happen? That had a soft connector, which means that when you pull it, it will affect the model, but it does not affect the model immediately. It affects the model eventually. Okay, and hence you kind of look at it and prioritize and say, okay, what are among all these things which are the strategy elements out here, what are the 2 or 3 things that are most likely to happen, and then how do we as a leadership team really eyeball this or control this, and how do we plan a scenario planning for this in some ways. Yeah. All right. Now, for this particular leadership team, when finally the model which they built, if you look at what are the stories that came out, this is what finally came out really, where they said, okay, this is our aspiration as a leadership team. We want to achieve this. We want to build this. We want to be strongly aligned. We want to build on diverse capabilities, and we want to build a strong second line of leadership. That was their definition as a leadership team in some ways. Yeah. Now, they've talked about a lot of things, but how do you kind of ensure that they take it back with them in some way? And which is why the team felt that there was a need for having some guiding principle for this team, more like a mantra for this team. And again, through the LSP process, which we followed, each of them was asked to build a model which defined one crisp statement in some ways. Yeah. And once everybody built those models, through a process of consolidation, elimination, wordsmithing, because there are 6 different statements which come out. So we finally arrived at a mantra which was like this. It said, be bold, be harmonious, be authentic. And for this team, I think they related a lot to this mantras for them. So just in the space of, say, a day and a half, which of course included a few other things other than Lego serious play also, what we helped the team do is arrive at a shared vision for the team. We also help them in terms of arriving at some mantras which they will hold themselves onto in some ways. And we help them to look at their strategy in terms of saying, what are the key elements of our strategy that we need to eyeball, as a leadership team, really. Yeah. That's about a very quick, kind of walkthrough of this whole methodology, guys.